everybody. My name is Paul Liston Jr., a.k.a. Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com, baby, and we're here live on a Friday night. We got moved into prime time. Sometimes schedule flexing happens, and if no one knows this better than calling an audible at the line of scrimmage, it's of course, our handsome co-host here. That is Randy Mueller, former front office executive of the year. He is a former NFL general manager for multiple NFL stops and perhaps the most prized gem of his career. Being right here with Boy Green doing this show every week, baby. What's up, Randy?
Good to be with you, Paul. You're right. I'll be honest with you, I'm loving doing these shows. You always keep me on my toes and sometimes have a little different angle that I haven't thought through. So I like our discussion. It's been good so far. I'm anxious to get into today's stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, as am I. And I'll give a quick shout out to the fans. When they saw our show wasn't on Thursday at 3 o'clock, they said, "What the hell is wrong? Where is Randy?" They're putting your face on the side of milk cartons everywhere. We need the Randy show. And again, we are a show of the people. So when you request, we deliver. That's just how it works. So here we are on a Friday night to make all this baby go together. And we got to get right off the top with one of the weirdest situations I think I've ever seen, Randy. And I know I've been on the planet less long than you, so maybe it's easier to be stunned in this way, but I have to say that the Las Vegas Raiders make a decision. Hey, we're moving on from Derek Carr. They bench him the last 2 games of the season because of all the contractual stuff. They make the decision they're probably moving on, but they don't want him to get injured because they could be on the hook for all the money that is in his contract that is set to be guaranteed here in about 12 days as of recording of our live show here. Yet Derek Carr was like a 12th alternate to the Pro Bowl, and he's there. He was purposely not wearing Raiders gear, wearing AFC gear, doing interviews, taking subtle, funny shots at the Raiders. But on a very serious note here, Randy, if Derek Carr was to get injured in what will be the flag football game, again, the Pro Bowl is now the Pro Bowl games, almost Olympic style, where they had half the games earlier this week on Thursday, yesterday. And the other half of the activities will be coming up on the weekend, including a 7-on-7 flag football game, which has replaced the full Pro Bowl game. If somehow in this silly game, Derek Carr gets hurt, the Raiders will be on the hook for the money. Randy, I have to ask you, why wouldn't the Raiders intervene here? Because even the chance of something potentially going funky here could put them in a really tough spot moving forward.
Yeah, it was a little crazy. I saw his interview, and he kind of poked fun at himself after part of the skills competition, but you're right. I think in this case, and I haven't seen the contract, I'll go with what you're saying. I would have also had something written in there that injuries that take place outside the game of football and outside our building don't qualify for guaranteeing that kind of money. Those would be considered in my world non-football injuries because he's not playing football. He's doing something else. So I don't know how the language works in his particular contract, but his whole situation is pretty unique. And you say how you have not seen a lot of this before. I've seen some of this stuff, but it's all triggered on 2 things. One, when his guarantee is exercised, and if the Raiders can do that or not. And 2, he has a no trade clause. So here's and this has been my take all along, the Raiders aren't going to trade him. If I'm Derek Carr, I don't want to be traded. Why would I want a team where I'm going to go to give up certain pieces to fixing our team as it is? I would force them, and that's why he also said he wasn't going to move back his guaranteed roster bonus, right? He wasn't going to restructure him. Well, I think this is his intent, is to force them to cut him. They won't guarantee that money because they will be on the hook for a different type structure than what Derek will get if he goes somewhere else. Derek's not going to get less money if he gets cut. In fact, he'll probably get a raise. So I don't think they're going to get anything for him. And if I'm Derek and have a no trade clause, why would I allow the Raiders to profit from trading me to another team? There's just a lot of variables there that don't make sense to me. So I think he'll end up getting cut. I think he'll end up having 2 or 3 teams that are major suitors for him, and he'll probably end up getting a raise. I think the fact that he's playing in this skills challenge stuff is more of a swan song to Las Vegas than it is anything Raider related. I think that bridge has been burned down. He knows that, and I think he's going to do what he can to kind of leave on a good note. And I think he feels like if he participates in this, it's his last chance to interact with the fans of Vegas and really the fans in and around the Raiders. So I think we'll all see how this shakes out in the next week or 2. But this is my opinion. I don't see it ending in a trade somewhere. I think he's going to get released and pick his own spot.
Yes, and additionally to that, it's kind of random. The Pro Bowl has been kind of a moving circus. In the old days, it used to be just straight up in Hawaii every year, which I'm sure the players appreciated. But now this one is, of course, randomly in Las Vegas. So he's been weirdly practicing and playing inside the team facilities for some of these Pro Bowl events, which, like I said, is just kind of weird. But to your point, Randy, on the trade or cut conversation, which is kind of evolved for some of the outsiders or insiders rather in those Raiders building that we've had a chance to kind of speak with. Some said, "Oh yeah, a trade's definitely happening." No way, the trade's not happening. A cut's happening. So the meter has kind of gone all over the place. But I've leaned towards you this entire time. That just doesn't make any sense. Derek Carr had admitted during those Pro Bowl interviews, as you said, that he's not pushing back this February 15th date. If he did, in theory, would help out the Raiders to potentially trade him. But he said, no, I don't think that makes sense for me. And you know what? Derek Carr's right. It does not make sense for him at all. And I think you're right, Randy. He may even actually get more money potentially here if he gets released into the open market, because again, he can speak with multiple teams and make visits and do all that kind of thing. But let me ask you, Randy, if you were in the chair, what would you do here? And is this such a difficult position for the Raiders because they want to say, hey, we got a pretty good quarterback here. You can beat the rest of the race because you could trade and figure out your quarterback situation in the middle of February, well ahead for agency. Don't you want to beat the line? Don't you want to trade us something and we'll help you out? Again, that's what we're trying to do if we're the Raiders. But again, there's all those points you also just said. So how difficult is that position for Mr. Ziegler there with the Raiders?
Well, I think their die was cast when they did this deal with him last offseason. That's when the extension was made with him, and all the particulars were put in there. The no trade clause, the roster bonus coming due on this day. Derek Carr has a very sharp agent. They did not just willy-nilly add these clauses. They understood that a decision would have to be made. They got some criticism because the total dollars wasn't as crazy as some thought it would be, but they're going to hit free agency at the peak of free agency when other teams have their money. So if I'm the Raiders, I just don't think they have any choice in this matter. They kind of made a bad deal, I'll be honest with you. And now they're going to get nothing for it. Again, if I'm Derek Carr, I don't want to be traded. I want no part of that. And I have the no trade clause. So at the end of the game, I have the trump card. So I think this is all conjecture. I don't think the Raiders can do anything about it. I think once this contract was in place and it was negotiated a year ago, like I said, their die was cast. So I think it is great if the Raiders could trade him. I just don't think it's going to happen. And that's what I'd be trying to do. But I may have to, maybe I get out of it this way, Paul. And I'm just kind of thinking out loud here a little bit. Maybe I pay Derek Carr to waive the no trade clause, which allows them to get something for him. And he can, in turn, if you give him permission to do that, maybe rework a new deal. They're not going to get a heavy bounty for Derek Carr. They're not. Derek shouldn't want that, and I don't think he will, because that's just weakening the team that he's going to.
Well, yeah, I would just say that if that does happen, which all of a sudden perked my interest, I'm certainly intrigued. I all of a sudden feel like I'm on the deal or no deal set. I'm waiting for the banker to call and make me an offer as Derek Carr as I sit back and lean back in my chair. Yes, what is the offer that you guys have? Because again, that could be tantalizing itself. Let me throw this at you, Randy. Okay, Jeremy Fowler, NFL insider for ESPN, floated out the idea this morning in an ESPN Plus article that perhaps the Raiders could straight up cut Derek Carr before the flag football game because, again, of the possibility in the bylaws of his contract that, again, if he gets hurt basically doing anything outside of, even within the game of football, but any of this kind of stuff, his guarantees would be triggered and the Raiders would be responsible for it because I guess the Pro Bowl also counts with football activities, apparently, in this contract. Jeremy Fowler floated out, that's the first I've heard of it, that they could just cut him before the deadline, screw the deadline, before the flag football game to make sure they're just not on the hook. Would you entertain that if you are the Raiders?
Well, I'll be honest, I don't think they have any choice. They're going to have to cut the guy. So whether it's today, tomorrow, February 14th, it doesn't really matter. So I guess I would tend to agree with Jeremy that that's an option. But Derek Carr will be happy if the Raiders cut him. That he'll get exactly what he wants. He wants the timing of which to be a free agent when all teams have the most amount of cap space available. That's going to be the first day of the league year. So if they want to cut him now, he'd have no problem with that. Trust me.
All right, let me get the Raiders' perspective here real quick. It seems like no matter what, as you mentioned, they're moving on for Derek Carr, whether it's today, tomorrow, next week, this time, your time, who cares? They're moving on from him. Where the heck should they go at quarterback? It's a very weird position. Josh McDaniels is entering year number 2. They saw a little bit to like there potentially with Jarrett Stidham when he was randomly thrown into the lineup in place of Carr. They could go after a big money veteran. There's been some Aaron Rodgers whispers this week, and obviously there's Jimmy Garoppolo, who has a direct connection to Josh McDaniels. Where do you believe, Randy, they should go next post Derek Carr?
Well, I think they'll start at the top. I think they'll explore the Rodgers deal without a doubt if they haven't already. I happen to think that may be their best fit. I don't know what Aaron is going to end up doing. I've got a couple sleeper teams in the mix that we may have talked about last week for Aaron Rodgers that I think might be a landing spot as well. But I'm sure Josh McDaniels is going to shake every tree he can. And you mentioned the other one in Jimmy Garoppolo. That's a possibility. You said direct connection, no doubt. Upgrades where they're at right now. But I'll say this. McDaniels likes Jarrett Stidham. He has had a propensity for him for the last couple of years. He played good in one of the games, played average in the other game where he replaced Derek Carr with him. So I don't think that's their end game. But if the resulting inactivity brings them back to Derek Stidham, I think they'll be fine. So that's in his opinion. Now that's not going to get him in the top echelon of quarterbacks in the league. So I think they're going to shake every tree. I think they're going to look to see what happens in other cities as well. Who knows what happens with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore? As you know, Mike White's going to be a free agent. Let him and Derek Stidham compete for a job. There's a lot of different scenarios that are going to paint the quarterback picture. I think Tennessee's another team that's going to be looking for a quarterback. They've got a ton of money in Ryan Tannehill. If that went away, they could be players for a big money guy too. So there's going to be some Atlanta. What's Atlanta going to do? Plenty of spots for the Derek Carrs to land, and then in turn for the Raiders to add to their quarterback room as well.
And I think you're right on there, Randy. Our last one here on the Raiders. Be blunt with me, Randy. Let's get honest with each other. Just me and you. No one else is listening. No one else is watching right now. The Raiders, outside of quarterback, they have to figure that out. Is the rest of the roster ready to compete with the AFC? And maybe I should be more specific and say the AFC West with all those monsters in the division that entered Sean Payton. More on that later. But is the Raiders roster ready to compete outside of the quarterback position in your mind?
I don't think so, Paul. I don't think they're ready for prime time. I just think the competition within their own division is better than them right now. I think they've got to find a way, and this happened last year. It was some pure cultural, some locker room issues, whether it was Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow. These guys were missing time when others thought they shouldn't miss time. I mean, they're juking and jiving to figure out who's on the same page with Josh McDaniel. Then they kind of caught fire and ended up the season pretty good. So they have some issues still. I don't think defensively they have put together their best group yet. So they've got some ways that they need to add players. I think they have enough cap room. If Derek Carr does go away, that's going to leave them with a little cap room to kind of add a player or two as well. But to answer your question, no, I don't think they're relevant yet, especially within their own division. And that's an issue. When teams are built around the league, and I know we did this many times, we got to structure our team to win our own division. We got to get out of our own division. And so that's sometimes your goal first is to get out of your own division before you compete for a playoff spot or a Super Bowl spot.
Well, I love that, Randy. Maybe we'll have to do this separately. The Jets haven't won their gosh darn division in 20 years. It's since 2002. So we're going to need your notes on that one. We'll see when the heck they can figure out that Pandora's box. A story perhaps for a different show here on the program. But let's stay in the AFC. Let's hop on over to the Indianapolis Colts, a wildly fascinating team. And they're doing what some people believe is one of the most bizarre things they've heard in recent NFL memory. The Colts do not have a head coach. The Arizona Cardinals do not have a head coach. Those are the two last teams in the mix here. And one of the teams, in terms of the Colts, they're currently heading into a third layer of head coaching interviews. When I've reached out to my own people and also a few national people that have come out, we've heard some of these quotes: bizarre, unusual. And the one that texted me said, this is completely over the top because you should know everything you should know based on the first two rounds of interviews. Randy, I have to ask you, are you in the same camp? Have you ever heard of anything quite like this before?
It's a long and windy road. You're exactly right. I do know Chris Ballard and know him fairly well, and I know he's not of this ilk, right? He does make decisions fairly quickly. He's a sound decision maker and a good football guy. So I can only assume that Jim Irsay's camp and the spin that they've put on this has taken them on some detours. I could never imagine having to interview three different layers of candidates. Maybe they have a Super Bowl assistant in mind, and so they're waiting to after the Super Bowl. That could be a possibility. That's the only two teams playing now. And we know unless the
Right.
team gives a special permission that those guys are off limits now till the end. So, I don't know. I can't make sense of it. Something in the back of my mind keeps saying that is Jeff Saturday really an option for these
Oh
guys?
gosh.
Now, that would
Oh
make
Lord.
wouldn't that be apropos? That would make it really crazy if something like that happened. So I can only hope that maybe a Super Bowl coach or that's involved in a Super Bowl will be the end result of this. But I'm like the fans. I'm having trouble connecting dots, and I don't really understand it because they not only have had since the end of the season, Paul, they've had really since week 5 or 6, whenever they fired Frank.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they've had 3 months to sort this out. So how it took this long, I have no idea.
Yeah, again, once you mention the Super Bowl thing, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe that makes sense. But to your point, we keep hearing nuggets that, especially the rumors down at the Senior Bowl, of course, happening down there in Mobile, Alabama, is that, Jeff Saturday looks to be the favorite. And I'm like, if he's the favorite and they pick him after going through this wild range of 3 series of interviews, and to your point, people forget, of course, Jeff Saturday was hired mid-season because Frank Reich was fired, since picked up by the Carolina Panthers. So it would just be very weird to come all the way back around there and to hire Jeff Saturday. What the hell have you guys been doing the last 3 months? Because not winning football games, that's for gosh darn sure. But yes, a very bizarre situation there, which I guess leads me to this question. How attractive is the Colts job, Randy Mueller?
Yeah, I don't know that it's at the top of everybody's list, but it's not as bad as you'd think because they do have some cap room. I think the whole wild card is the position of Irsay, the owner. I think everybody kind of views that as a little bit of a, obviously his dad was a Maverick. I think Jim's a Maverick to a certain point, but at some point you worry about that. And I have talked to some coaches around the league, and the biggest thing that they struggled with when you go back and revisit how the Jeff Saturday thing happened, Paul, is Jim Irsay had Jeff Saturday watching practice tape while Frank Reich was running this team. So it was kind of like out the back door evaluating him.
Yeah.
And that is kind of a no-no. That's a trust issue for a lot of coaches, especially. Coaches are very loyal. They do not want to get into something like that. And I don't think if Jim Irsay wanted another coach to do that, they would have. But Jeff wanted the job so bad, he was willing to do that. And then the fact that it went public, and it came from Jeff, that he happened to be watching film all along, that's a bad one. That's really one that coaches struggle with, front office people struggle with. We got a lot of football acumen in our building, and now we got to go outside and try to gather more acumen while we're struggling. That just it left a bad impression in a lot of football people's minds.
100% in mine. When you just said it, that gives me the heebie-jeebies. I know we've heard it for some time, but still, that's weird. Let me do my job. You're letting somebody else. You're like, hey, you're my guy. Hey, Jeff Saturday. What do you think about the practice tape? How we looking? Like, ooh, not a good look whatsoever.
Who really loves all this is the social media guys, because I see the hackers, I see the fun stuff people are doing on Twitter with this whole search. It's disrespectful, but it's not far from the truth. It's kind of a carnival type atmosphere that you just don't know. You can't figure out what's going to happen at the end of the day. And not that anybody should, but you want to be able to follow the logic. And there just hasn't been a lot of logic in this whole search.
That there has not. Again, Randy Mueller here on the show, guys. Make sure wherever you're watching, you show your support, like the video, hit subscribe down below. We'll try to get to your questions at some point, everybody. I see there's a lot of good ones coming in, so keep those coming, and we'll try to get to the best of them at the end of the show. Let's go back to this, Randy, and I ask you if past histories, failures, or successes will guide you in the future in GM decisions and head coaching decisions for that matter. And that's at the quarterback spot, because the Colts have said, well, look at our roster. We're going with a veteran. And quite frankly, it just hasn't worked out. Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan, Jacoby Brissett, Carson Wentz in no particular order. And they've had just complete lack of success in the veteran quarterback market, which has led some analysts and people outside of the NFL to kind of throw their hands up and say, I've had enough of the veteran quarterback. We have to get a rookie. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So, Randy, would you lean towards that rookie quarterback? It seems the Colts have the potential, of course, being in the top 10 of the 2023 NFL draft. Or do you still try to swing for a veteran because maybe you just picked the wrong veteran? It doesn't mean veteran should be completely taken off the table. What are your thoughts?
Well, my choice wouldn't necessarily be veteran versus rookie. My choice would be, let's get the best one. Can we not figure out the best one? And I think you hit on it. Their evaluations of the guys they've gotten really is where the problem lies. I don't think they went into it with the idea of what's going to get a veteran quarterback. They're just looking for the best options, and they haven't found the best options. To be honest with you, Phillip Rivers was their best option, and that was 3 years ago. And they let him walk out the door. So they've gotten worse with the moves they've made since then. So I think they've got to tweak their evaluations. Evaluating quarterbacks is hard, and it's not for everybody. And they have struggled to get it right there. I don't know who's in the mix. I don't know who does it there, but it hasn't worked. And I wouldn't be so caught up in the fact that let's don't go with another veteran. I want one that's good. And if we say we're going to go with a rookie, there has to be a rookie worthy of picking in the top 10. I'm telling you that, and this happens every year, the social media evaluators, it doesn't equate to the NFL evaluators. It never does, because they don't know the criteria. Every team has a little different criteria as to what they're looking for. The Colts need to find the job description that they want to fill and then go find it with the best guy. I don't care if it's a 40-year-old veteran. I don't care if it's a 22-year-old rookie. Let's just evaluate the skill sets of each and figure out what fits best for us. Now, what makes it a little harder is not having a head coach or a scheme yet. But they have plenty of time. We don't play a game next week. But they do need to nail down a coach here in the next week or 10 days so they can actually put a staff together too. That's the other thing. If you're the last team to hire a head coach, it's a scramble for assistant coaches as well. So you've got to have given yourself enough time and connected a few dots where you have some good assistant coaches in mind to come with that head coach. Those dwindle the more teams hire their coaches and their staffs start to fill up. So that's another angle to the head coaching cycle as well.
And such an astute observation, Randy, when you say the social media age of what it kind of thinks it prepares us for a draft, and then what actually happens, it's no truer than what happened last year in the 2022 NFL draft. Social media told me, the internet told me, Malik Willis is going round one. Desmond Ridder. One quarterback went in the round one. There was Kenny Pickett. Malik Willis went in the third round. Desmond Ridder went in those late day 2 and day 3 combinations. So all the social media people said, "Oh yes, quarterback, important position. We're going to force him up the board." Well, that's not what the NFL people said last year, Randy.
No, you're right. And the need is there. We all recognize that.
Of
but
course.
You cannot pass over great players at other positions to fill a need at quarterback, especially if they're not worthy of being picked. And most NFL teams will not do that. But it's easy to do when you're doing your mock drafts and when you're doing the other things on TV or on the radio, because it is a struggle to do it once you have the criteria that you want these guys to fit. It'll be interesting to see how this works out. There's 2 or 3 guys, maybe 4 guys this year that people are already throwing around with every team that needs a quarterback that they can solve it in the first round. It's not going to line up like that, trust me, because when the NFL gets done with their evaluations, they may not have the amount of quality quarterbacks that they think are going to be good in the NFL that the outside sources have. It's just totally different. There's no bigger case than, and we'll get into this more as the offseason goes on, no bigger case than Bryce Young. Nobody's looking for 5'9", 180-pound quarterbacks, Paul. I got news for you. They're not. So I don't care who it is out there in the media that says this guy's the best playmaker, he's magic, he's this and that. He's still 5'10", 185 pounds. And durability matters. And processing from the pocket matters. Size definitely matters in a lot of different ways, because they're not going to run the offense they ran in college. They're going to run something totally different. And guess what? The NFL has pretty good defenses. They're pretty good players. So it's a whole different set of criteria that the NFL teams apply to these positions than what the social media evaluators do.
And a random detour on that for the people who don't know, like people will say, well, what about Kyler Murray? Kyler Murray had some Brutus beefcake on the frame. I mean, he had a body that while he was short, he was thick, he was stout, and he brought that to the table. The Bryce Young, 5'9", frail frame. We have just not heard that kind of quarterback talked about number 1 overall in, let me see here, never. That has never happened. So the fact that he's trying to gain weight ahead of this offseason process here, it still kind of raises my eyebrow, because it's one thing to add weight in magic fairyland in the offseason, but can he maintain that weight? Is that legitimate weight once we get to the NFL season? So 100%, Randy, I'm raising my eyebrow at the Bryce Young thing, because there's a lot to be evaluated here for someone that has never transcended the system in this way of being that kind of guy with that frame at the game's most important position. So
definitely an outlier. And most people who pick high in the NFL draft aren't willing to take that risk. Kyler Murray is a great example. I'll be honest with you, Paul, 25 of the 32 teams would not have selected Kyler Murray either, because he just doesn't fit what they do. Now, I understand why Cliff Kingsbury wanted it, because he does it. Yeah. He runs a system that Kyler was familiar with. The other 25 teams did not. So they didn't have him rated that high. And just because Cliff picked him there doesn't mean that that was the consensus around the league, because it really wasn't. So everybody's afraid to kind of sometimes say the truth. I guess that's our job, right? We got to say the truth. We can't not say if we believe something to be true.
100%. That's our job. That's our mission. That's our missive to you, the fans out there. You know, some people can't handle the truth, but we can right here on this gosh darn program, baby, which takes us down to what some people tell me is the official kickoff of the offseason. That is down there in Mobile, Alabama, the Senior Bowl. Okay, everybody, let's head on down there. Jim Nagy, a good friend of mine, doing great work down there as the executive director of the Reese Senior Bowl, been doing it for a couple years, and then he took over for my guy, Phil Savage, who's behind enemy lines over here with the New York Jets, doing great work. I know Phil is down there right now at the Senior Bowl as well. So let's dive into this, Randy, and talk about some of your experience there, because you've had a couple of teams that have played in the Senior Bowl before, and that is a unique advantage. The Jets obviously just had it last year as well. So what are the real benefits of the Senior Bowl from your perspective, especially actually having a team as part of the coaching staff and the benefits that lie within?
Well, the biggest thing, Paul, is rather obvious. You get to spend 24/7 with a batch of kids, not only on the practice field, but in the meeting rooms as well. So you can easily glean how a kid learns. Does he learn well? Can he make adjustments? Can he process things? Especially from the quarterback standpoint, you can dig deep and get to know these guys when you're face-to-face with them for a whole week. I think there's some downsides to coaching staffs being at the Senior Bowl, though, as well. And I love Jim Nagy just like you do, and everybody wants that to succeed. So they get backing from all the NFL teams. So I'm not slighting the system or the process, because the Senior Bowl is valuable. But there were a lot of times when I didn't want my coaches going to the Senior Bowl and developing their first impression there. And here's an example. Maybe you've got kids who haven't played in 2 months, and they get to the Senior Bowl, they're a little rusty that first couple of days. This guy played tackle all year long at Boston College, and now we're asking him to play guard. I don't want my first impressions of the coaches to be that. I want them, and I would always make our guys watch tape first of the guys on the roster, so they had already developed an impression before they go down there. See, the scouts, the personnel people in NFL offices all have done that. So it's not their first impression. I would not want my coaches to develop that first impression without having a real long litany of pros and cons on players before we get there. So that's one of the drawbacks to do it. The other thing is the Senior Bowl serves a lot of value. It is a great cause, but I don't know how much sometimes coaching staffs that aren't coaching, that are there as prospective scouts, I don't know how much they get out of it.
I see. Well, let me ask you.
That's the bottom line for me.
Ahead.
I think go ahead.
No, I guess the only thing I would add is there a chance here? Because let's go to, I'm trying to think of a good example. Maybe the NFL Combine isn't, because you kind of get those 15-minute speed dating nowadays. But, you know, a player, and I could bring it to the dating world, I suppose, that, you know, when I go out on a date with when I used to, I'm happily engaged now. But back in the day when I used to go on the dating world, when we went out and about, I would put on my best face. They would put on their best face. We'd meet at some random location. We both meet each other, walk away. That's our first impression. And we're like, oh, okay, not bad. But if you were living with the person, you get a much different experience. So I ask you, does that kind of translate in the same way to the Senior Bowl, that sometimes a player can put on lipstick and you think that your interpretations of the player, like, oh, wow, this guy's great. But with the Senior Bowl, it's kind of unlocked because you get them 24/7. It's a lot harder to fake something, it seems, 24/7, multiple days in a row with the coaching staff right on top of you from your guys' perspective when you have them in that environment, as opposed to some of those one-on-one 30 for 30 visits and things of that nature.
100%. I think that definitely factors in. I do think the interviews that you do at the Senior Bowl might be as important as anything. I think the time you get to spend, and now they've kind of curtailed that a little bit and made it more structured. I mean, 10 years ago, we would go there with the idea of we're going to take out 3 players and we're going to go have dinner and spend a couple hours with them. You can still do some of that if it's not their night to be interviewed, but they've almost structured it now like a combine interview process where the horn blows every 15 minutes. That's more of a cookie cutter type interview session. We used to get these kids, we'd bring them up to our room, and sometimes we'd spend an hour with a guy. And that gets you really deep into what they're thinking, how they process, how they learn. And what we do, Paul, is we try to teach them something in that 20 minutes. And then at the end of it, have them regurgitate it back to us. Just so to test memory, to test a lot of things, learning, focus, all that stuff. And we gained a lot from that. So there are good things, obviously, to glean information from at the Senior Bowl. I think some positions you can get more than others. For example, if I was a quarterback and already thought of to be pretty high, I don't know if the Senior Bowl would be for me, because it's kind of like the combine. I'm going to go there. I'm going to throw to receivers I've never seen before. Half of them are neighbor kids. The timing's going to be off. We're not going to be as sharp as we would. And guess who gets the blame? The quarterback, not the receiver. I'm telling you, this happens at the combine more than ever before. That's why the top guys don't throw at the combine, because it's kind of a fire drill. You might throw to 10 receivers that you haven't even met yet, and everybody runs a different depth route. They're trying, but it's all different, and it always looks bad on the quarterback because the ball's not right where it should be. Nobody ever says, "Oh, that receiver did cut his route off by a yard," even though that we all saw it. It's just very risky for quarterbacks at combines and at all-star games. And that's why I think you don't see the top ones go there. But if I was a down the line quarterback, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to go expose myself to every bit of the NFL as I can, including meeting with all the teams. So there's just different varieties of players and different statuses of players that make an all-star appearance more valuable or not. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that definitely makes sense. And again, I think it gives us a little behind the scenes. And sometimes when a quarterback makes a decision, let's say the combine did not throw, from the fans and social media perspective, oh, what a wimp. He skipped out. What's going on there?
Yeah.
100% that there's actually more going on there than people think. Randy, I hinted at it to start off this topic of the Senior Bowl, that you've had some teams that have been part of the coaching staffs for a couple of them. Reveal them to us. Who were some of the teams that you had? Who were you a part of at the time, and who was your coaching staffs for your appearances at the Senior Bowl when you were directly, volunteered, picked, selected for those classes?
Well, we did it 3 times, I think, to my knowledge. 2 when I was with the Seahawks. One team a long time ago was coached by Chuck Knox. The second time we did it was coached by Dennis Erickson. And I think one of my Miami teams coached them as well. And we spent a lot of time, I'm telling you. And the other thing it does, and we did this, I learned this from Chuck Knox, because you spend so much time with one side, one team, we would then take one night toward the end of the week, Paul, where we would meet with the other team's coaching staff and kind of reveal each other's thoughts on that team, because we never got to see them because we're always practicing, right?
Of
so
course.
It gives you 2 teams worth of in-depth coaching interviews that we only shared between the 2 coaching staffs. So that was valuable for us as well. So we kind of doubled our pleasure, so to speak. One time the Chargers coached in the game and they had Phillip Rivers. And that's when they fell in love with Phillip Rivers on that side of the ball and ended up drafting him high in the first round because they fell in love with him at the Senior Bowl. And that's easy to do. So there's a lot of connections to be made, a lot of value to be gained. They used to pay the coaching staffs a lot of money, and the winners got more than the losers. So it became a lot of fun and competitive for these coaching staffs as well. They would go there and grind it out those last couple of days, especially. Chuck Knox used to give his greatest speeches on Friday night before the Super Bowl because it meant 10 more grand to all of his coaches in their pockets.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's an awesome story. And hey, there's no motivation like Benjamin's, the dollar bills.
Cash, baby, straight cash.
That's absolutely sure. All right, let's go to this. We'll empty out the GM notebook, and like I said, we'll end with some fun mailbag questions. We'll have our producers behind the scenes pull some of the best ones out. But let's empty the GM notebook here. These are some random, quick-hitting nuggets we didn't cover already that Randy caught his eye a little bit this week. And one of them, we're going to roll the footage on this one. Again, this level of transparency we normally don't see. A lot of cat and mouse between coaching staffs and players on a podium at a set and then speaking to the media. But Kyle Shanahan decided a different perspective when he was asked about Jimmy G. Let's roll the footage on that one.
I wish you guys could see Jimmy being back, and if so, what would that look like?
No, I don't see any scenario of that. Yeah, no, I gotcha.
There you go. Very blunt from Kyle Shanahan when he was asked, hey, is there any scenario that Jimmy Garoppolo could be back in 2023? No, I don't see any scenario. Of course, Randy, before I even ask you about that, I think they kind of said that last year when they were going to trade him and said there was no scenario he came back. And guess what? Well, He came back. The ultra, confusing and difficult part of this process is there are some reports out there that Brock Purdy is going to need complete Tommy John surgery. If that's true, that could put you out 9 to 12 months. Very unusual, rare injury for the NFL. Jake Delhomme, off the top of my head, there's a couple of players in history who have done the Tommy John surgery, but it's very rare in the NFL as opposed to like baseball, let's say. So that could put him out for a year. So he's out of the picture. Trey Lance busted up a lot of things in his leg, and he could be out of the picture. And if Jimmy Garoppolo, part of his contract renegotiation where he's going to hit free agency no matter what anyway, man, what the hell is the answer at quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers? This is a tough thing to kind of send out there, except the 49ers seem to say no, at least from our perspective, no Jimmy G coming back this time, it seems.
Yeah, Kyle didn't mince any words. He slammed the door.
Nope.
I don't think there's any chance he even wants to consider it. And you're right. Jimmy G got dumped back in their lap last year and really saved them all. So the confidence level on the quarterback decisions that they have made wanes just a little bit, because don't forget they gave all of the compensation to move up to get Trey Lance. Trey Lance is probably still a year away. He's still not ready for prime time. Jimmy G, they didn't want. He had to practice on another field all year long. They didn't even want him around the team. He comes back and leads them. And then the saving grace is their last pick in the draft ends up being the best of all of them in Brock Purdy. So the other thing that Kyle said in that same presser was that he thinks he has 2 starting quarterbacks. Now, you mentioned it. I'm not sure which quarterback is going to be healthier sooner, but that could be problematic. I'm not a doctor for sure. I can tell you that, Paul. I know you have high regard for me, but I do not carry any status. And so I don't know what Brock Purdy's elbow injury is. If it is indeed Tommy John, I can't imagine him coming back before another year, or at least missing part of next year. The Trey Lance injury is pretty common. I can see him being back and ready to roll. It sure sounds like Kyle is the one guy who has the most confidence in Trey Lance. If you sent this around the league as to saying, is Trey Lance ready for prime time or not, I think it would come back probably 30 GMs no, 2, 1 maybe, and Kyle yes for sure. So he's kind of doubling down on his move a couple years ago in the draft to take Trey Lance. He hasn't showed enough for me that I would be willing to say, okay, so if the medical people are leading the way, and if they say Brock Purdy is not going to be ready, I've got to have another quarterback for sure.
Yes.
And I don't know that Jimmy Garoppolo would ever come back there after kind of the way they've gone again. I think he will find greener pastures, but I do think they're going to have to find a safe approach out there somewhere by adding a third quarterback to the mix. I would have probably played a little nicer with Jimmy G. I don't think I would have slammed it in his face just from a respect standpoint. Now, maybe he does leave, but it's like he didn't even want to consider that, and he didn't want to give the media any thought of getting that snowball rolling again.
Right.
So I think that's why he probably cut that off. But I think you're right. I think they've got to add a quarterback somehow, some way. Maybe it's a Jacoby Brissett. Maybe it's somebody like that. But they're going to have to spend some money to get one. I don't think anybody's going to covet that job because, hey, Brock Purdy might be better than all of them, and eventually it's going to be his job. It might not be till 2024, but he's going to be there. So you're probably looking at a 1-year deal with a veteran backup somewhere that fits your scheme and your system and that you can live with. That's easier said than done.
Well, Randy, let me ask you this. Are you surprised by, again, you put it beautifully, Kyle Shanahan didn't mince words with the Jimmy G thing. He also didn't mince words with a couple other of those nuggets during the presser. The one that you mentioned that he believes he has 2 starting quarterbacks, one Mr. Irrelevant, and one he traded 3 first-round picks to acquire. So the mental psyche of one Trey Lance could be in question. Wait a second. We're both starting quarterbacks? You traded up for me, number one. Number two, also during that presser, they being the 49ers brass, both John Lynch, the general manager, and Kyle Shanahan, the head coach, were both at the podium, and they both said that, let's be honest, Trey Lance has to stay healthy. He needs to prove that he can stay healthy. So also, again, with the, it's been a series of unfortunate events as it pertains to the injuries with Trey Lance, but it seems like they haven't really gone out of their way from a mental psyche standpoint of trying to, kind of, at least from in front of the scenes. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but, whispering sweet pleasantries to him saying, hey, you're still our guy. We still believe in you. That's certainly not happening at the podium, which I find interesting.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think they've treaded on thin ice for the most part by trying to not alter the ego of Trey Lance. This is my opinion, Paul. If both those guys are healthy, Brock Purdy and Trey Lance, it's Brock Purdy's team. I mean, he surpassed anything that I've seen in Trey Lance in the last 7 weeks that he played. So that one's not even a problem. So I do think they want to keep Trey Lance alive. They want to make his psyche better and kind of treat him with kid gloves. He will be healthier sooner. So he's going to get a lot of the offseason reps again. We'll see where that takes us. He still doesn't have the body of work that I would trust for the long haul. So I've got to ensure, again, with a playoff roster like they have, they've got to ensure against these quarterbacks' health. I don't know how they could ever walk down in that locker room and just say, hey, we're going to hope that these two young guys are healthy enough to lead us to where we want to go. I don't think they can take that risk.
All right, let's stay in the NFC West there. The Arizona Cardinals is the other head coaching job we hinted at earlier that is still open. And apparently the rumors in social media land that one of the reasons that they're having trouble, again, they also hired a new GM in Mr. Ossenford. But one of the reasons apparently that the head coaching job hasn't been filled, according to the rumor mill, is that a lot of candidates are kind of hesitant to hitch their bandwagon to that Kyler Murray guy we talked about earlier. Because again, with his torn ACL in the November range, it's hard to prognosticate when he will be available, and plus he just signed a record-breaking deal. Randy, do you buy or sell some of these rumblings coming out that head coaching candidates are somewhat hesitant to tie their bandwagon to this job, considering Kyler Murray is on the other end of it?
I think it's a burden. I don't think it's a plus, that's for sure. But I'm not so sure that it's not necessarily about the medical status of Kyler Murray. It's really the ability and the skill set. He doesn't fit everybody's offense, trust me. And we mentioned that early on, and that he fit Cliff's stuff. He's not going to fit a traditional NFL type scheme. So you're going to have to find a little different coach, a little different offense, and then one be willing to take him. The hard part is, I don't know when his money kicks in, but he's probably going to miss the first half of next season anyway. So you may have to sign a legitimate quarterback and spend some money on him. And Kyler Murray may not see the field next year at all, if that's the case, and if you're doing well. So I think there is some cloudiness around this coaching job and the search based on what their view of Kyler Murray is. I don't think the view of hey, let's just face it, the Arizona Cardinals put a clause in his own contract that he needed to study football more. They put a study hall in there. So do you think the rest of the NFL is going to disregard that? Of course not. They know what they're dealing with. So that can't be a positive. Whether they took it out or not, that doesn't matter. The statement was made. So if I'm a coach, I'm going to be leery of that. And I may ask, are we married to Kyler Murray? Forget the medical stuff. I want to know, are we married to him and for how long? So his contract will be an issue, and that's probably part of the discussion before they hire anybody.
Randy, do you remember putting any of those kind of clauses in an old contract of study preparation time on a weekly basis? Do you ever remember slapping that in one of those contracts?
No, I don't. I don't think it's ever been done. And I think the fact that you picked this guy with the first pick of the draft and now you have to do that is an indictment on your process alone. And again, Kyler Murray may be the sharpest guy around. He may be the hardest worker around. I don't know that. But somebody felt the need to put this in there. So perception is 90% of reality, right? And the reality is we all think now that there's a struggle there. And hey, if you watch Hard Knocks in season this year, you'll see that there's some doubt around that franchise and around that locker room as to what they really have with Kyler Murray. So that's a hard one. It's a hard one for a new coach who has options to swallow. Now, they may hire a coach that is, these jobs pay good. Not a lot of guys are going to have the kahunas to not take the job if offered. So they'll get a coach, but that is going to be the elephant in the room until they solve it.
All right, let's go to the Sean Payton one, who, again, was the hottest candidate on the market. Hey, this is the guy. And it seemed like it seemed to lack its luster as we were kind of going through the process. Then out of nowhere, the Broncos go, oh, hell yeah, we're trading a first, a second. They also gave a third back to make that deal happen of Sean Payton landing there. And then on the same day, we hear reports from Ian Rappaport, well, they really wanted DeMeco Ryans, and they went back to Harbaugh, back to Ryans, and said, okay, guess we're going to Sean Payton for this blockbuster package. You need some sort of a big bachelor's degree or something to keep up with all the movement that was happening there. But Randy, it seems like no matter what, you ultimately believe that the job, the fit potentially here for Sean Payton was always there in Denver.
I thought it was just based on the Russell Wilson experiment having failed. I mean, they put this whole franchise at risk last year when they acquired Russell Wilson and gave him all the bells and whistles to be the face and the voice of this franchise. It didn't work. They couldn't run it back. And I think if they hired anybody but Sean Payton, it was almost saying, we're going to run it back and we're going to keep things like they are. I felt like Sean Payton was the only guy who could walk in the room and be in charge again and be the adult in the room and never have to say a word. If Sean Payton doesn't think that Russell Wilson is doing things correctly, he's going to replace it some way, even if they have to take a $50 million cap hit. Sean Payton doesn't care. He didn't sign it. So I just think he's the one coach that brought them the accountability. So it's almost like a doubling down on the deal to Russell Wilson. They gave up how many picks for Russell Wilson? 5, 6, 3 or 4 other players.
Yeah.
This is just 2 more picks to double down on that investment to try to make that right. It may not work at the end of the day, but they felt like they needed to do this. And I do think it's a good fit for those reasons. The other part is, I know George Payton, their GM. He worked for me in Miami. He has no ego. He's going to step aside and let Sean do his thing. We all know Sean's personality. He's very upfront. He's very controlling. I don't think George is going to have a problem with that. He's going to allow that, and the two might be able to work very good together as long as Sean's impulses don't create some team-building issues along the way. That was one of the things in New Orleans that people struggled most with, was Sean was a little impulsive and kind of forced certain moves on the front office that may or may not have worked out. I don't think they want that in Denver. So anyway, I think George is the good GM for Sean. I think they will be able to work it out. But another elephant in the room is what they do with Russell Wilson. I think Sean had the best chance to fix the Russell Wilson experiment.
Man, George eventually becoming a GM after working with Randy. Coincidence? I think not. Heck no. Of course it happened. I can only hope to have the same level of success that George did by riding the gosh darn coattails of Randy Mueller. That is a great business plan, historically speaking. It seems to be. Let's get one more nugget in here on the GM notebook. And this would be surprising if you would have told me this a year ago, Randy, but is a Brinks truck about to back up into the front yard of New York Giants quarterback Daniel Jones?
I think it is. I think he's going to get paid, Paul, and I don't think the Giants can afford to let him go. They take a step back wherever they go. Even if it's a player that's slightly better, the adjustment that they'll make is usually going to be a step back first before they gain 1 or 2 forward. So I just don't think they can allow that. I think there's enough teams that are struggling at quarterback right now that they might pay Daniel Jones $40, $45 million a year. He progressed this year beyond where we all saw it, but the football guys saw what the skill set he had was, and that it wasn't just this year. There were some things that held him back in prior years. I think there's enough body work there, and the progress was so good this year that somebody can say, hey, he's our guy, and we're going to pay him. Can the Giants tag him at the end of the day? Probably, and they may have to, because I don't think they can risk letting him walk out the door and negotiate with anybody else, because then you lose complete control.
100%, which again could be the big piece in all of this that I don't think anyone possibly saw coming, is again Daniel Jones maybe getting the franchise tag or this crazy money deal, which you said, Randy.
Well, and I think the key might be, we've heard that they've opened contract talks with Saquon Barkley a little bit.
Yes.
I think the ideal plan there is to get him signed and tag Daniel Jones. That's probably why they haven't even talked to Daniel Jones yet. They already have decided they're going to use the tag on him on a 1-year deal and move forward.
100%. I would have thought, my gut would have said, because of the franchise tag numbers coming out just a week ago that were sent to NFL teams, Saquon's franchise number around $10 million, which isn't bad when you consider that the top of the market is Christian McCaffrey at $16 million. However, you can't play that game, because if Daniel Jones knows you're slapping the tag on him, he can kick his feet up and wait to reach the open waters, because he knows he's going to get a lot more money out there than he would inside the Giants building, which makes this a very interesting, tango, so to speak, ahead of free agency, which could be very interesting, indeed. Before we sign off here and get out of here, I've seen we've gotten a bunch of questions in here. So Thomas, he's our producer behind the scenes. Pick one. I see we have a YouTube super chat in there. We'll get to that one a little bit later. Let's go to NY Jets FL, and this will be a historical question, Randy, to go back into your time as a general manager at multiple different stops, including an executive of the year. Wink. That is on the resume. Hey, baby, I'd have that pretty high. But from NY Jets FL on YouTube, please ask Randy what player blew him away at the Senior Bowl or NFL Combine. Historically speaking, Randy, do you have any name from the past that really jumps out?
I don't know about a specific name, Paul, and I think those two exercises as part of the process are a little different. At least at the Senior Bowl, they're playing football. At the Combine, They are not. It's the underwear Olympics. They're running around in shorts and t-shirts and doing absolutely nothing. Those more mistakes get made watching combine stuff than any other element of the process when it comes to evaluating people. I would say this at the Senior Bowl. I would always look for DBs and receivers. I think those guys are usually at the top of their game there. You can see things within defensive back, the position of it, where you can check fundamentals, you can check instincts, you can check all the boxes that you need to, even in some one-on-one drills, and the same for receivers. Those two positions for me are more valuable than any positions at the Senior Bowl. I think you get the truest picture of a particular player when you watch those positions throughout the whole week, because they are competing on every snap. I struggle a little bit with the offensive and defensive linemen because you seldom see them going together as a team until the game itself. It's a lot of pass rush drills, and those are weighted. The defense should win the majority of those. So there's some sets of criteria that aren't really equal when you evaluate them. But I think DBs and receivers are something fans should watch and try to hone in on, probably both at the combine, but definitely at the Senior Bowl throughout the week.
Extremely exciting stuff. Let's go to a YouTube super chat, baby. Thank you so much for investing in the product. We appreciate it. Tony Alexio, do you believe Daniel Jones can be our best choice? And by our, I know how to interpret that. Of course, most of my content here on YouTube is New York Jets inspired. And it seems weird that the Jets would want a Giants quarterback who they laughed at when he was the number 6 overall pick. But I guess that just shows you how the world can turn. Randy, is he potentially the best option available for the Jets? There's been some sexy names discussed, but Daniel Jones actually is coming off a career year, both in both some of his rushing and passing touchdown interception ratio analytics. Very nice.
I think he would be a really good choice for him, but I think he's going to be a good choice for 6 or 8 teams. Again, when you studied the film a year ago and watched where Daniel Jones was, and his limitations really, in my opinion, weren't his doing or his fault, I think that really gives you heed to be willing to pay him some money. When Russell Wilson made his list of teams he would go to coming out of Seattle a year ago, the Giants and the Eagles were 2 teams that I thought might be interested, and I would have taken Daniel Jones in return or Jalen Hurts in return, because you saw enough of their bodies of work then, and now look where they are a year later. 2 guys that aren't. Jalen Hurts is going nowhere. I don't think Daniel Jones is going anywhere either. So there was enough skills to evaluate there and enough progress being made to where I thought both of these guys would be future really good NFL quarterbacks, and Daniel did nothing but move ahead in that regard right now. So, but if the Jets could get him, I'd say have at it, because he will upgrade their position right now.
There you go. Tony, from the best in the business, Randy Mueller. Thomas, if we have one more, we'll take it, or we will sign off right there if we have one more available in the hopper. No more. Okay. None past the sniff test, according to Thomas. And, well, I will take his word for it. Well, everybody, I want to thank you so much for joining us here. I know it was a different day than normal, but you guys came out in droves anyway. Spectacular. And as always, it's always cherished time with me spending time with none other than Randy Mueller, our former NFL general manager and heavy front office insider. Randy, as always, man, thank you so much, and enjoy your weekend, pal.
Thanks, Paul. Have a good weekend. And thanks for all the fans who are chiming in with their comments, too.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.